Mercedes may not have been caught because Russell was fast. Mercedes may have been caught because his tires refused to die. That is the part rivals could not ignore. Not the lap time, the degradation. Because in Formula One, when a driver pushes hard, the tires are supposed to pay the price. They slide, they overheat, they lose grip, they fall away. But Russell's Mercedes looked like it was breaking that rule. The car stayed calm. The rear stayed alive. The pace stayed there. And suddenly, the paddock was asking the most dangerous question in racing. Was this tire management, or was Mercedes hiding a cooling trick the FIA never meant to allow? Because if that system was illegal, Russell's performance becomes a scandal. But if it was legal, the rest of the grid has an even bigger problem. Mercedes may have found a way to protect the tires while still attacking. And in Formula One, that is not just speed, that is control. And control wins championships. Subscribe to the channel. At first, the Mercedes explanation would sound completely normal. Russell managed the tires well. The setup was gentle. The balance was strong. The team found the right window. And in Formula One, that kind of answer can be true. A driver with confidence can protect rubber. A car with good rear stability can stop the tires from overheating. A clean race in the right conditions can make degradation look better than expected. But this is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because rivals were not suspicious only because Russell had good tire life. They were suspicious because the tire life seemed to arrive with pace still attached. That is the difference. Anyone can save tires by driving slowly. Anyone can make the rubber last by backing out of the fight. Lift earlier, brake softer, turn in gently, delay the throttle. Give up lap time now to survive later. That is management. But Russell's Mercedes seemed to suggest something far more dangerous. What if the car could protect the tires without giving away the speed? That is the kind of performance that changes a race, because tire degradation is supposed to be the price of aggression. Push hard, and the tires punish you. Attack the corner exit, and the rear overheats. Defend too long, and the surface begins to slide. Follow closely, and the temperatures rise. Use too much throttle, and the rubber starts losing life. There is always a bill. Formula One is built on that bill. But when a car appears to push while paying less than everyone else, engineers stop watching the driver and start watching the system. They ask where the heat is going. They ask why the rear is not sliding. They ask how the tire temperature is staying under control. They ask whether the driver is managing or whether the car is doing something that makes management easier. And that question is exactly why the alleged Mercedes cooling trick became so explosive. Because cooling does not only protect the engine, it can shape the whole car. It can influence packaging. It can affect airflow. It can decide how much drag the carries. It can affect the way the rear tires are loaded. It can help keep the power unit in a cleaner operating state. And if all of those areas connect, the result is not just a cooler car. It is a car that treats its tires differently. That is what rivals would fear most. Not that Russell drove well, he may have. Not that Mercedes found a better setup. They may have. The real fear is that the W17 had a hidden thermal advantage that made the tires behave as if the race was less brutal than it really was. That would be huge because tire degradation is not just about rubber wearing away. It is about energy. Every slide puts energy into the tire. Every traction event puts energy into the rear axle. Every unstable moment forces the driver to correct the car. Every correction overheats the surface. Every overheated surface reduces grip. And once grip begins to disappear, the driver has to slow down or the damage gets worse. That is the spiral. Sliding creates heat. Heat creates degradation. Degradation creates more sliding. And suddenly, a car that looked fast early becomes helpless later. But if Mercedes found a way to interrupt that spiral even slightly, then Russell would gain something more valuable than raw speed. He would gain consistency. And consistency is what wins long stints. A car that protects tires can delay a pit stop. A delayed pit stop can create strategic pressure. Strategic pressure can force rivals to cover earlier than they want. An early stop can expose them to traffic or tire wear later. And once that happens, the Mercedes is no longer just fast. It is controlling the choices of everyone else. That is how tire life becomes a weapon. Not by looking dramatic, by quietly forcing the race to bend around it. This is why the cooling angle matters so much. If the Mercedes system helped stabilize temperatures, then the benefit would not appear in one obvious moment. It would appear across the stint, lap after lap, corner after corner, exit after exit. The tires would simply stay alive longer. The car would keep its rear grip. Russell would not need to fight the steering wheel as much. The throttle could come in cleaner. The lap time would remain more stable. And rivals would start asking the question that every team fears. Why are they not degrading like us? That question is dangerous, because the answer can be many things. It could be legal. It could be a balance. It could be mechanical setup. It could be smoother torque delivery. It could be Russell's driving style. It could be tire pressure management. It could be better cooling around critical areas of the car. Or it could be a hidden trick that crosses the line. That uncertainty is what makes the story powerful. Because if something is obviously illegal, the FIA can act. But if something is hidden inside a chain of legal-looking systems, the investigation becomes much harder. Mercedes would not need one dramatic illegal part for rivals to panic. All they would need is a system that creates an effect the others cannot explain. A car that keeps the tires calm when they should be overheating. A car that maintains rear stability when it should be sliding. A car that lets Russell push without triggering the degradation rivals expected. That is enough to start a war. And in Formula One, tire wars are never small. Because once a team understands how to protect the tires, everything else becomes easier. The driver can attack earlier in the stint. The pit wall can wait longer. The car can run in dirty air with less damage. The team can respond to safety cars with more options. The strategist can choose instead of react. That is control. And control is the one thing every top team wants more than anything. A raw power advantage can be exciting. A qualifying advantage can be spectacular. But a tire advantage is cruel because it makes the rival suffer slowly. They watch the gap. They wait for the Mercedes to fade. They expect Russell to start losing grip. They prepare for the drop-off. And then it does not come, or it comes too late, or it comes smaller than expected. That is when a race starts to feel unwinnable. Not because the Mercedes is untouchable on one lap, but because every time the rival thinks the advantage should reverse, the car keeps going. That is the psychological damage of low degradation. It breaks assumptions. It makes the other pit wall doubt its models. It makes the driver ask whether he is pushing too hard. It makes engineers question whether their simulation missed something. And once doubt enters a pit wall, mistakes follow. A team pits too early. A driver attacks too soon. A rival saves too much and loses track position. Another pushes too hard and destroys the rear tires. Meanwhile, Russell stays inside the window. That is the nightmare scenario. And that is why rivals would not accept a vague answer from Mercedes. They would want the FIA to understand whether the cooling system was simply efficient or whether it was influencing the tire story in a way the regulations did not allow. Because cooling and tires are connected more deeply than casual fans realize. The car's thermal behavior affects how aggressively Mercedes can package the bodywork. The packaging affects airflow to the rear. The rear airflow affects stability. Stability affects sliding. Sliding affects tire temperature. Tire temperature affects degradation. That chain matters. If the cooling system lets Mercedes keep the car tighter, the aero may become cleaner. If the aero is cleaner, Russell has more rear confidence. If Russell has more rear confidence, he does not overwork the tires. And if he does not overwork the tires, the stint looks almost unreal. That could be legal brilliance. But rivals would still ask, how is it achieved? Because the phrase illegal cooling trick is not really about cold air or hot air. It is about whether Mercedes created a thermal pathway that gave the car a tire advantage outside the intended limits. A hidden flow route, a temperature management method, a component behavior that only appears when the car is hot, a way to protect performance under race conditions that the FIA standard checks might not fully capture. That is why the inspection state matters. The car sitting in the garage is one version of the Mercedes. The car at racing temperature is another. The garage version is calm. The racing version is alive. Materials expand. Pressures change. Temperatures rise. Airflow behaves differently. The tires are loaded. The engine is under stress. The driver is demanding torque. That is where the real advantage appears, if it exists. And that is why rivals would demand the FIA inspect the Mercedes in the condition that matters. Not only cold, not only stationary, not only after the car is cooled, but as close as possible to the state where Russell's tire advantage appeared. Because if the system only works hot, then cold inspection may miss the story. That is the fear. The car returns to the pits, the temperatures drop, the parts settle, the system looks normal. The team says the car is legal, and rivals are left staring at a race stint that still does not make sense. That kind of uncertainty is poison. It does not just attack Mercedes, it attacks trust. Trust in the result. Trust in the FIA process. Trust in the idea that everyone is fighting the same tire battle under the same rules. And when tire degradation is involved, that trust matters even more. Because tires are the great equalizer in modern Formula One. Even the fastest car has to respect them. Even the best driver has to manage them. Even the most powerful engine cannot ignore them. The tires decide how much performance can actually be used. So, if one car finds a way to make the tires suffer less, that car does not only gain grip, it gains authority over the race. That is why the Russell story hit so hard. It was not just another accusation against Mercedes. It was a challenge to the normal laws of a race stint. The normal law says speed costs tire life. The normal law says heat eventually hurts. The normal law says aggression creates degradation. But the W7 may have looked like it was bending those laws. And when a car bends the laws of tire behavior, rivals begin searching for the hidden mechanism. They look at the cooling. They look at the power delivery. They look at the rear suspension. They look at the aero map. They look at how the car exits slow corners. They look at whether the engine torque arrives more smoothly. They look at whether thermal control is keeping everything inside a perfect window. That is the forensic side of Formula One. Every lap leaves evidence. A tire trace, a throttle trace, a speed trace, a temperature curve, a degradation slope. And if those traces look too clean, the accusation grows, not because clean is illegal, but because clean can be suspicious when nobody else can reproduce it. Mercedes would know how dangerous that perception is. They would want to protect the story immediately. They would say Russell's tire life came from balance, execution, and setup. They would say the cooling package is within the rules. They would say rivals are turning strong engineering into scandal because they cannot match the performance. And that argument would land with some force. Formula One has always rewarded the team that finds performance first. But rivals would not let the story end there. They would say the FIA must judge the effect, not just the explanation. They would say a hidden cooling system that changes tire degradation is not normal if it operates outside the intended regulation. They would say the car must be measured under the conditions that create the advantage. They would say the championship cannot wait for clarity after the damage is already done, and that is the real conflict. Mercedes wants this to be seen as efficiency. Rivals want it investigated as exploitation. The FIA has to decide whether the advantage is legal, illegal, or simply too gray to leave alone. Each answer creates a different future. If the system is illegal, Russell's performance becomes part of a scandal. Mercedes faces pressure. The result is questioned. The W17 becomes a symbol of a line crossed. If the system is legal, the rest of the grid has a much bigger problem, because then Mercedes has found a way to protect the tires while staying inside the rules. And legal tire protection is one of the hardest advantages to defeat. You cannot protest it away. You have to understand it, then copy it, then beat it. And that takes time. That is why rivals panic so quickly around tire degradation, because the clock is brutal. Every race that passes gives Mercedes more data, more confidence, more points, more understanding of its own system. While rivals are still trying to decode whether the advantage is hidden in cooling, power delivery, aero stability, or all of it together. That last possibility is the scariest. All of it together. A hidden cooling idea supporting the power unit giving smoother, usable torque, the tighter packaging helping the aero giving Russell a calmer rear, the calmer rear protecting the tires. The protected tires preserving pace that is not a trick anymore. That is a chain reaction. And a chain reaction is what changes a season because one benefit creates the next, then the next, then the next. And by the time rivals finally understand the first link, Mercedes may already be winning with the fourth. That is why the opening part of this story has to be understood carefully.